Hello everybody, thank you for joining us here on the first video on the Rhino Men channel. Rhino Men is an absurd action comedy novel written by me, and it's due out at the end of 2026, self-publishing. So if you've joined us, this is the place to find updates on the novel. Please do subscribe if you have any interest in reading a very ridiculous book. And I'm going to just be reading chapter 1 here, and further videos will come probably on a sort of week by week basis. So here we go. Rhino Men, Contagion, chapter 1. Quick disclaimer, this book features very explicit material. It's got a lot of swearing, it's got a lot of sexual descriptions and violence from the very go. So if that doesn't seem good for you, now is the time to stop. Thank you. In an old New York City apartment, on top of a set of very expensive silk sheets, Rydian Portcullis was laying down some serious pipe, and the beautiful woman he shared his life with, Danielle, was loving every thrust. A lot. Although her arms were of average length, Danielle couldn't reach all the way around Rydian's broad, muscular back. He was simply too gargantuan. Instead, her fingers clung fiercely to chunks of his flesh as she braced herself for each invasive plunge. She didn't mind the scars on his back. They actually made her hornier. "Finish inside me, baby," Danielle wailed from within the luxurious sheets as the intercourse reached its zenith. "I am climaxing." Like a Japanese train, Rydian Portcullis came on time. The two lovers made their own respective love-making noises without shame, before Rydian collapsed on the bed beside Danielle. Not because he was exhausted, as he was in peak athletic condition. It was just a convenient way to go from his hands and knees into a more romantic lounging position. For a moment, the lovebirds silently beheld each other from within the tastefully draped silk, which had fallen gently upon them. Danielle with her inviting gaze, French bob, and absolutely enormous breasts, and Rydian with his sculpted pecs, arms, chin, beard, and mullet. They were beautiful creatures, sequestered from any and all troubles by their love for one another. "This feels like a dream," said Danielle as she lit 2 cigarettes and placed one in Rydian's mouth. "I know. You're just so beautiful," replied Rydian, sucking down the cigarette with purpose as his huge member gradually retracted into a slightly more modest 12-inch soft form. A single droplet of his seed clung graciously to the top of his manhood, like dew upon a rose. Danielle stroked Rydian's 5 o'clock shadow, leaning her head on his preposterously built chest. "You know, I really think this might have been the one," she said with a quiet excitement. Rydian looked at her knowingly, placing his hand on her tummy and wrapping his huge arms around her. He smiled. "Ready for round 2? He asked, knowing full well she was ready to go. "You know it, baby," she replied, breathing her cigarette smoke onto his member. He became erect. Suddenly, Danielle screamed as what looked like a huge jagged sword erupted from her stomach. Blood flew in all directions, up, down, left, and right. It ruined the vibes and caused a huge mess. Wiping his eyes of blood like a guy with glasses wipes his glasses when they get all steamed up, Rydian looked down at Danielle's spectacleless eyes. They were filled with abject terror as the sword ripped its way through her womb, diaphragm, and up along her neck. Rydian tried to hold her head together as the blade sliced directly down the centre, splitting her skull like a coconut. Her brains were flung into Rydian's nose, mouth, and eyes. He screamed like a powerful manly girl, and he didn't stop. Rydian Portcullis awoke, screaming, and instinctively reached for the 15-inch hunting knife he kept underneath his sweat-sodden pillow. Springing from his bed with a single flex of his hugely developed back muscles, he slashed into the darkness with the knife, lunging for a grey shape in the corner of the dingy room. He screamed of rage again as the knife sliced through the dressing table, knocking to the ground a collection of empty whiskey bottles, many of which had been filled to the brim with cigarette butts, in a cacophony of glass on wood. Slapping his own face with a hand like a marble plinth, Rydian came back to his senses. Other than him, the room was empty. The nightmares hadn't stopped after all. Tucking the knife safely back under his pillow and instead pulling out a bottle of whiskey, Ridian lit a cigarette. The man barely fit inside the tiny bedroom, with shoulders so wide he'd had to extend the door frames throughout the apartment, at great expense. With shaking hands, he held the whiskey bottle to his lips, taking several lengthy swigs. As the shakes departed, he interrogated his bedroom for threats. An old mirror with a painted gold frame, which hung at the foot of the four-post bed, reflected his naked, sweaty figure, a man of stature to be sure. 6 foot and 9 inches tall, with excessively well-built, vascular arms and legs, and a chest like a fire engine. Massive. Yet, despite his vastness, Ridian's face held a delicate, if stern, beauty. His prepossessing eyes had seen a lot as a highly decorated war hero, and the icy calmness on his face portrayed a man without weakness. Well, mostly. A siren blared outside the window. Then a train rumbled by for a while, shaking all of the mirrors and unfastened furnishings in the tiny apartment. Then another siren, and then another train. Finishing the first cigarette in one smooth drag, he placed a second against his 45-year-old lips, hoping he hadn't woken little Nicky with his now nightly screams. It was 6 months since Ridian had come home to this very apartment and found Danielle's body in a pool of blood. As Ridian leaned out of the apartment window and puffed masculinely on his second cigarette, he remembered that night clear as day. "Honey, I'm home," Ridian had shouted that day 6 months ago. As he just barely made it through the door, "I'll have to get that widened," he thought to himself. He'd arrived home late, as he usually did after he'd been out arm wrestling. He was a pretty big deal in the underground arm wrestling world, and it was making him a lot of money for very little work, supplementing his military wages while he took a well-earned week off. Oh God, that's good. He pulled 8 rolls of $20,000 out of his denim jacket pocket, tossing them into the pile in the corner. It had been a good night. But suddenly, Ridian realised that something wasn't right. Danielle never usually lay in a pool of blood. "Danielle!" Ridian shouted, his usually completely measured tone for once giving way to panic. His panic was justified. At a glance, Ridian counted 37 bullet wounds in Danielle's chest, quickly estimating his fiancée's time of death to have been 23:14, 7 hours prior. It was far too late for CPR. Ridian allowed a solitary tear to well up in his left eye as he beheld her pale face, although the tear wasn't strong enough to make it past the actual tear duct. The tear ducts are actually one of the first things you train at a Navy SEAL. "There's no more pain where you are now, baby," he said quietly, after 10 minutes of screaming, kissing her forehead before covering her punctured body with a clean toy movie bedspread, which was handily placed perfectly folded on the kitchen counter. Danielle's little disabled teenage brother, Nicky, was a big toy movie fan. "Oh God, Nicky!" said Ridian, with his gruff Brooklyn accent, realising that the wheelchair-bound boy would probably be getting out of bed to piss at any moment and wouldn't easily handle the sight of Danielle, his only living relative and sole source of financial support, completely shot to shit. "What is it, Ridian?" asked Nicky, rolling into the room about as nonchalantly as was possible considering how weak his arms were. The poor kid had been hit by a school bus when he was 11, yet had somehow still retained his upbeat personality. Well, until now, that is. Don't look over here!" shouted Ridian, turning Danielle's completely destroyed body away from Nicky, her brother, while leaving a trail of blood on the usually spotless black and white checkered kitchen tiles. "Why, is it a present for me?" asked little Nicky, in his naivete. Yeah, it's a toy movie present for your birthday, and I haven't finished wrapping it yet, so stay over there, goddammit!" Ridian could barely mask the lies, in spite of his years of training. He could feel how cold Danielle's body was in his huge veiny arms. His tear ducts had now prevented 7 or 8 tears from entering the world. "But it's not my birthday for 10 months, Ridian," said little Nicky, who had just recently learned about months. Feebly, he continued rolling closer to Ridian on his rusty second-hand wheelchair. "I said get the fuck back!" shouted Ridian, tossing the kitchen table towards little Nicky's wheelchair like a deranged gorilla. It smashed into pieces, none of which hit Nicky. Such was Rydian's accuracy, he would never hurt that boy, well, not unintentionally. Nicky was all that remained of Danielle. "Hey, watch that potty mouth," responded the angelic, wheelchair-bound teen. "I think I'm going to get Danielle to come and have a word with you. You're acting cranky today." Before Rydian could respond, the apartment door was smashed open, with several armed NYPD officers entering the room. Nicky screamed and shit his pants, which was fairly unusual. Rydian faced down the first responders, with the blood-soaked corpse of his fiancée in his mighty, almost ridiculously strong arms. "Don't fucking move!" shouted the female police officer, obviously not realising who the fuck she was talking to. Soaked in blood and holding Danielle's buxom shell, Rydian's eyes briefly held the after-image of a locally striking lightning bolt, which flashed outside the window. He was about to tear this female cop to shreds. That was where the flashback ended, as the horn of another passing train snapped Rydian back to the present moment. Now, exactly 6 months after that dreadful day, Rydian sucked on another cigarette as he stood naked in his dark bedroom. After yet another nightmare. Danielle's death had been swept aside by the local cops. Home invasion gone wrong, they thought, and with no witnesses, the case had gone nowhere. Little Nicky had been in the next room with his headphones on watching Toy Movie 4, so hadn't heard the 37 shots that pierced her body, or the other 85 which missed and hit the walls. Things had started to fall apart after that. Rydian lost his job as a Navy SEAL, not because he failed the psych test, but because he had actually passed it with flying colours. For some reason, the shrink found that to be not merely suspicious, but impossible, considering the traumatic events Rydian had just lived through. Rydian had argued, very well, that he'd always had an exceptional bill of mental health, no matter which important member of his family had died. But the bastard shrink wouldn't listen to reason, extremely logical reason. It smarted somewhat to have been relieved of duty so illegitimately, but Rydian could take his licks. His deadbeat father had told him how. Naturally, Rydian wanted nothing more than to track down the sick fuck, or fucks, who'd killed his fiancée Danielle. The conclusions reached by the NYPD were absurd. Random home invasion? Piss off! There were 1,000 people who could have wanted to get to Rydian, to hurt him. Russian gangsters, extremist revolutionaries, the breakdancing gang, the list went on. And yet, with Nicky's extreme needs and medical costs, his hands were too full to investigate himself. By day, Rydian was caring for little Nicky, feeding him, taking him to disabled school, and wiping his teenage ass. And by night, Rydian was keeping his broken family afloat by arm wrestling for moderately huge stacks of green. In fact, he had a match tonight. He was, in fact, the main attraction. But first, as usual, he had to wipe some ass. Still cold with sweat after his nightmare, Rydian yanked a pair of white briefs up his powerful legs and over his thick cock. It coiled into a position of comfort like a cobra in a wicker basket. Dressing himself in denim jeans, a denim jacket, a denim vest, and a crisp white t-shirt, he kissed the portrait of Danielle which hung next to the extra-wide door, and made his way to the kitchen. It was a small apartment, so that journey only took 5 steps, one of which landed Rydian's bare foot in one of Nicky's errant shits. "Oh, come on," grumbled Rydian, disliking the feeling of having a disabled 15-year-old shit between his otherwise handsome toes. It wasn't that Nicky shat himself 8 times a day, it was that he had taken to leaving them around the apartment wherever he felt like it. A coping mechanism, the doctor had said, for dealing with Danielle's death. Meanwhile, Rydian's only coping mechanism was an ever-growing fondness for chin-ups and whiskies on the rocks. Rydian hopped to the bathroom so that he could shower his soiled foot, and en route noted wheelchair tracks of Nicky's shit throughout the apartment. Rydian loved the little guy like he was his own disabled brother, but these 6 months had been almost as trying as any of his deployments with the SEALs. There was a lot less death, but the constant arse-wiping, floor cleaning and wheelchair wheel scrubbing had taken a toll on Rydian's overall satisfaction level. Being extra careful not to step in any more shit, Rydian gave Nicky's door a gentle rap. "Yo, little Nicky," he said gently. "It's 5 a.m. Time to get ready for school." 5 in the morning might seem fairly early to be getting up for school, but Nicky usually did between 4 and 7 shits per morning, and the clean-up on each of those usually took at least 15 minutes. From the other side of the door, Rydian's excellent ears could make out the familiar sound of Buzz Lightwalker talking about sucking down Darjeeling with Mary Antoinette, As usual, Nicky had gone to bed with Toy Movie playing on repeat on his DVD player. Sure, it was old-fashioned, but it kept the kid off the hardcore porn. Ridian knocked again, hard enough to shake the wall about as hard as a train, which was also passing overhead. My God, that's good. Yo, I said it's time to get ready for school, he repeated, more firmly this time. A few moments later, the sound of Toy Movie halted, replaced by a loud crash. Concerned, Ridian barged into the room, his massive shoulder knocking a chunk out of the doorframe, to find Nicky face down by the side of his bed. The poor kid's shit-covered ass was bare to the world, and a fork was sticking out of his leg. He'd fallen onto it. He screamed like a wild pig as Ridian raced to him, yanking the fork from his leg and returning him to his piss and shit-coated bed. Ridian cleaned those sheets daily, sometimes twice or even thrice, but it made little difference. Hey buddy, what did I say? This is why we clean our cutlery away, said Ridian, who had had this conversation with Nicky more times than he could count on 8 hands. You made me fall! You disturbed me! Yelled the 15-year-old Nicky, his face recently punctured with at least 12 piercings. And even one of those really big, wide holes that people sometimes like to get. He had assumed his own version of the goth or emo look since his big sister Danielle died. Ridian supposed it made sense. The poor kid had a lot to be emotional about, but it looked fucking cringe. Blood was gushing from Nicky's fork wound, but he couldn't feel a thing in his legs, so it didn't really matter. Ridian swiftly applied a bandage and mopped up the blood, while also taking the opportunity to clean up a bit of the shit on the teen's legs. I didn't mean to startle you, Nicky, said Ridian with extreme kindness. You know, we just need to start getting ready for school. I have a meeting with the principal today, although he wouldn't say what about. Do you have any ideas, big guy? No, I don't fucking know. Maybe he wants to fuck you, replied Nicky, obstinate in his rudeness as ever. Ever since Danielle's death, Nicky had changed. Where he'd once been a sweet, brave kid with a smile on his face despite his challenges, he was now a brooding, violent arsehole with a penchant for shitting on the floor, which, by the way, had nothing to do with him being disabled. Realising he wasn't going to find out from Nicky why the principal had called a meeting, Ridian decided to change tact. I was proud of you in the school play yesterday, Scout. You played the role of the tree so well. Nicky started to spin a fidget spinner on his hand, spraying small morsels of shit into the air, 2 of which landed on Ridian's permed mullet. Ridian flicked them off into a piece of tissue, crumpling it into a much larger ball of shit-stained rags. It was so cool to see you branch out, said Ridian, trying a dad joke. It didn't land. You can quit the dad jokes, Ridian. You're not my fucking dad, erupted Nicky, very obnoxiously. He hadn't shown a single morsel of appreciation for all of Ridian's support and sacrifice since Danielle was murdered. In fact, if Ridian wasn't so utterly selfless and driven by duty, this kid would have been out on the street months ago. I never said I was your dad, said Ridian, as softly as the behemoth of a man could muster, while he administered a gentle yet firm initial wipe of Nicky's soiled but dry arsehole. His face had become more hairy. His arse had become more hairy lately, and Ridian had noted how this could impede the wiping process, which was already a tricky activity. No, you're right, Ridian, replied little Nicky, shamelessly bent over Ridian's knee. You just boss me around every day and never let me do what I want to do. You had to go to school, said Ridian as he scrunched up a wad of 3 or 4 more wet wipes. You can't just watch Toy Movie all the time, no matter how revolutionary it was when it was released, or how well it holds up today. You need to socialise and learn about the world. Don't you think that's what Danielle would have wanted? Could you unclench for a sec? Nicky acquiesced, allowing Ridian to swirl a further 4 wet wipes together, making this final wipe of Nicky's ass especially moist and slick. Oh shit, that felt nice, said Nicky, momentarily forgetting to uphold his customary scowl before resuming his usual angsty disabled teen with no family expression, which Ridian was most acquainted with. There, all clean, said Ridian, remaining positive as he tied up the plastic bag of shit and arse hair and began to dress Nicky, who was as limp as a rag doll, for the day. You know, when I was growing up in Japan, my master, Miyamoto-sensei, taught me a valuable lesson when I was about your age. Though balsa wood appears strong, it will break in the midst of a slight gust. But when bamboo bends, it can survive a storm which would otherwise sink the mightiest ship in a stormy sea at night. Miyamoto-sensei sounds like a moron, said Nikki, as a little gust of stinky air popped out of his butt. Show some respect. English is not his first language, Nikki. I thought he was trying to say that even when terrible things happen, if you keep your chin up, you'll be okay. Yeah, sure, Ridian. I should just continue with my shitty fucking life and forget the fact that my big sister got fucking shot right here and you didn't fucking help her. There it was. It was tough to hear those words, even for a man as tough as Ridian, from a kid as pathetic and weak as Nikki. The guilt hung to Ridian Portcullis like a shit stain on a disabled teen's wheelchair seat. That shit was sticking around no matter how hard you scrubbed. Or what chemicals he used. Ridian wasn't using any proper hard drugs, but he sure had developed a taste for liquor, especially whiskey, and beers, and vodka, and sleeping pills, and a few other things, but who was counting? That night 6 months ago, Ridian hadn't been there to protect Danielle. He'd been too busy chasing underground arm wrestling fame, which was ironic, as since her death, arm wrestling was all he had left. Ridian felt a rising violent tension in his arms, legs, and back, as yet again he swallowed his shame. His pecs rippled like a heavy flag in strong winds as he recentered himself, remembering to take Nikki's words with a heavy pinch of salt. He was just a kid after all. But how come I agree with him then, thought Ridian, second-guessing himself for the first time in about 20 years. Maybe he had failed Danielle. Maybe, just maybe, Nikki was right. Now get over here and wipe my disabled ass, interrupted Nikki before Ridian could further ponder his feelings. Indeed, Nikki had shat himself again. Luckily though, Ridian's own right arm had been in the direct line of Nikki's arsehole, and the majority of the shit was balanced on it, supported by the wideness of Ridian's arms, and the thickness of his arm hair. He simply had to hose it off while making sure not to drop it or drip it on the way to the sink. Put your shirt on, said Ridian to Nikki, once again displaying more kindness than Mother Teresa. I'll be back in 2 minutes to wash your ass again. Then we're going for breakfast with Uncle Ernest. End of chapter 1. Yes, there you go. That's Rhino Men. So please, if you want to hear more of that story, you're interested in reading more and learning about when this will eventually be published, please subscribe. I will be updating. I'll be doing a few more readings, showing some of the art by the illustrator Jordan, who will is making a lot of great art for the book. So yeah, drop us a subscription, subscribe, follow me on Instagram, the Rhino Man Instagram I'll put up on the screen, and I'll see you all soon.